Chapter 1, I've been waiting for you. Had I known where I would end up and who I would run into, I never would have set foot in the Peterson house that night. Mr. Peterson is waiting for you. A maid, who I had never met before, opened the door of the mansion. She looked at me and politely smiled. Follow me, please. Carl Peterson, my fiance, and his family had a large house in New Jersey, only 40 minutes away from Manhattan. Carl and I were both sophomores at NYU, and since his place wasn't too far away from our university, I'd occasionally stop by to spend time with him. Earlier, the guard at the gate let me in without a word, probably because everyone knew that I was always welcome in my fiance's home. As my footsteps echoed in the hall, however, my best friend Jenny's warning echoed in my head. Although I tried to ignore it, it kept coming back. I walked in on your fiancé kissing another woman in the parking lot of a 5-star restaurant yesterday. Jenny's words repeated like they were on a broken record, and I shivered. I had to remind Jenny that she only saw they from far away and it was likely that it was someone who looked like him. Carl wasn't the type to be unfaithful like she had said, was he? No, there was no way he was. Even with me, he wouldn't go farther than a kiss or a warm embrace. He was such a gentleman and didn't entertain other women when he was around them, including my sister Bethany, whom every guy seemed to be attracted to. She was beautiful, sexy, and mature. Only Carl was different. He said that he loved my kind and innocent personality, and that we were made for each other. Carl was so special to me and he always said I was perfect for him. I envisioned a long, happy life with him. That's why I had just convinced my family to invest in his new startup business. I really wanted to support him after how hard he'd been working on it, and he even said that he wanted to build a company that he could pass on to our future children one day. I loved how he had our future planned out, but if Jenny was indeed telling the truth, I pushed her words out of my mind as I followed the maid. There wasn't any reason for me to believe Carl wouldn't be faithful to me, and I didn't want that negativity to ruin the moment. I sent him a message to let him know I'd be over today to hang out before I headed home for the weekend, as I wanted to surprise him with the good news. My dad's investment VP had preliminarily agreed to fund Carl's new business. I had the paperwork with me in my purse and wanted to start his weekend off right. He'd been working so hard lately. He deserved this and even more. Carl didn't message me back about me coming over, but it seemed that the guard and the maid both knew he was expecting me. As the maid led me through the long hallways, I realized how confusing the mansion was even though I had been here a few times. I had always thought that it reminded me of a fine arts museum with its cavernous hallways, its marble columns and chiseled busts of famous gods and goddesses. Sometimes I wondered whether Carl was the only one from his family living in this house. It just seemed awfully big for just one person. However, I didn't want to pry. I once asked Carl about his parents, but he mentioned he didn't get along well with them. Ever since then, I have avoided the topic. I walked with the maid up the massive and dark mahogany staircase, hearing our shoes echo on the hardwood steps around us. Suddenly, once we turned through another archway, I felt like something was wrong. This wasn't the wing that I was used to with its dark gray walls and black wainscoting when I visited Carl. I was usually taken to the west wing, but I was being led to the east, a part of the mansion that Carl had told me to ignore more times than I could count. My art museum analogy was spot on, as in this wing, the walls were full of romantic art pieces that depicted couples intertwined in ways that I had only shamefully fantasized about. They were a bit more revealing than I was used to, however, as we walked farther and farther down the hallway, and the windows were replaced by dull wall sconces, I felt a bit unsettled. I swallowed hard and peered at the maid with a polite smile. Not to be rude, but are you sure he is over on this side? Yes, Mr. Peterson is waiting for you in the room at the end of the corridor. She was so certain that I trusted her over my own feelings. After all, this was Carl's house. He was free to choose whichever room he wanted to stay in. We reached a dark wooden door that was different from the rest in the home. The maid took a step back and left me alone, excusing herself with a gentle bow. Although we'd been dating for a while, it wasn't often for me to come over here at a late hour. For some reason, I was a bit nervous, but I told myself it was nonsense. I'd spend some time with Carl, give him the good news, and head home afterwards like usual. I turned the shiny brass handle and opened the door. The room was dimly lit and had a strong fragrance of vanilla and spice candles. I squinted my eyes and waited for them to adjust to the dark room, wondering what Carl had been planning. Was this why he didn't message me back? Because he had a surprise for me? When my eyes became accustomed to everything, I was stunned by what I saw. This wasn't the surprise I had in mind. The wallpaper was matte black with embossed fleur-de-lis, and a massive, wooden, crimson X with black leather padding leaning against the far wall grabbed my attention. My gaze wandered over the lavish furniture with metallic hardware and leather upholstery. 2 types of whips in various shades of red and black hung on the pegs of custom-made, mahogany shelving units along with various types of paddles, bars, restraints, and more. There were soft bundled, black, nylon ropes hung on the far wall, framing a classical art piece of 2 lovers, ready to tie someone up with. Nothing about this room screamed my fiance. These items resembled things I had only heard via Jenny's mouth, and seen on her phone in secret. My face started to burn and my heart started to race. I needed to get out of here. An unsettling bubbling sensation rose through my stomach and made me want to run far away. This wasn't for my eyes to see. Suddenly, my heart pounded in my ears as the feeling of someone glancing over my body, surveying and taking note of my every breath and my faintest movement, branded me. Sweat glistened on my skin and ran down my back as my breathing picked up even more. The room felt like it was spinning, and I knew I wasn't alone. It didn't feel like my fiancé was in here though. It felt darker, more intimidating, like a predator, stalking, and waiting to pounce on its prey. Come, a dark, deep, growling voice suddenly caressed my ears, causing me to jump with a squeak as a low and solid command dropped into the silence. I've been waiting for you. Chapter 2, Alone with Carl's Father, **** Ellis POV. I watched her from the shadows, taking slow sips from my glass of imported red wine from my personal winery in the south of France. The woman froze, as if she was surprised by the command that echoed from my lips. She was gorgeous and just my type, young and beautiful, with her little summer dress and her ballet flats. I imagined what she would look like wearing a bunny mask, my collar, and matching white lace lingerie crawling towards me on her hands and knees before sitting back on her heels. How she would slide her fingertips along her sexy thighs, clothed in crisp, white, lace-topped, thigh-highs with her back straight, and her head tilted up. I shoved the lascivious thought away and focused on her. She looked innocent, like an angel in a demon's lair. Although she acted a bit different from when we talked over the phone, she was definitely worth the price. The atmosphere around me thickened as I slowly and meticulously circled around my prey in the shadows, channeling my dominant headspace and letting myself sink into the familiar feeling that I craved so much. Everyone followed my orders, whether it was in the office or in my dungeon. I reigned supreme in both my public and private life. However, she swallowed hard and didn't move. I stared at her, wondering when she would finally listen to me. I scowled in irritation at her inability to follow a simple order. I was paying top dollar for this girl and she was playing me for a fool. Do I need to remind you about our arrangement? I growled and spoke with a serious cadence. I said, come. She clenched her hands at her sides and shifted her thighs together like the sexy woman she was. As she stood there, I noticed she was even more beautiful than I could have imagined, a goddess compared to the others I had experienced. However, she was not adhering to the planned scene we discussed over the phone. She was toying with me, and I wasn't one to be messed with. A dark growl emanated from my chest. You know, I don't like to wait. She swung around and her pretty, pouty lips parted as she finally focused on me. There we go. There's my naughty girl. I knew she wanted me, craved me, needed me. I moved to stand in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. I was shirtless, only outfitted in a pair of tailored black dress pants with a glass of red wine. I was savoring her like a vice that I was forbidden to partake in. I needed more of her. I let my wine glass dangle from my fingertips, slowly swishing it around in the glass, making the warm liquid caress the smooth edges like I wanted to do to her curves. I wanted to trace them with my fingertips and my tongue, to make her arch her back and part her lips in a soft moan. I wanted to hear my name from her lips as she came hard beneath me. I wanted to make it so she would wake up and never forget who had been railing her between her thighs. I finished my wine and set my glass down, strutting towards her. Finally, she seemed to fall beneath my spell. Now I had her right where I wanted her, my curious, little kitten. I chuckled. Good girl. She shivered at my words and suddenly resisted me, planting her hands on my chest to push me away. I smirked and chuckled low in my chest, grabbing her wrists and pushing her towards the bed. You know I love a good chase, my sexy F***ck toy. The corner of my lips curled up, and my pulse raced faster as my C*** throbbed between my thighs. However, I didn't see excitement in her eyes as I expected. What the, Carl, help. My son's name suddenly shot from her pretty mouth. I paused for a second, and she took the opportunity to scramble up from the bed and fled to put her back against the wall of windows. "Get away from me," she demanded. "Who are you? This's my house." I answered her in a rough tone, then looked at her. "I should be asking you the same thing. What are you doing here?" Her eyes widened. I couldn't help but notice how pure and adorable her beautiful orbs were. Her voice came out timid and unsure, like she was walking on eggshells. "You're home." "I came to see my fiance, Carl." I was told I was always welcome here. She was Carl's fiance? God d***nit. I had mistaken her for the submissive I paid for. I opted to grab my wine glass and fill it again before I did anything else. Then I downed it in a few swallows before I cleared my throat and introduced myself. Ellis Peterson, Carl's father. The shocked expression on her face told me that she didn't fully believe what I said. I stared at her for a couple seconds. I gotta say, any man would appreciate her precious little face. She stared at me confused, worried, and scared senseless. Her face was pale, and she looked like she was about to faint on my damn floor. I was expecting someone else. I let the words filter from my lips in a quick tone. I wasn't the type of man to explain myself for anyone, no matter what I'd done, but this was a bit too fed up. I was expecting a submissive, who I had paid top dollar to be my personal play toy from a privately owned luxury dungeon. She was carefully vetted. We had discussed extensively the scene that we were going to play out here, and she had agreed to all of the terms. Except she wasn't the girl in front of me. Damn it, I felt like a damn idiot. F***ck. I needed to salvage the damage I had done to this poor girl, my son's fiance, she said. Hurrying over, I grabbed my tailored black suit coat from the back of a chair. I brought it over to her and draped it around her shoulders, trying to offer her some comfort. I had her sit down in my crimson leather-upholstered armchair. I crouched down in front of her and adjusted my suit coat on her shoulders, watching as she continued gasping for air. "How about a glass of water?" I locked my gaze with hers. Her eyes followed me, as I stood up and walked over to a drink cart where I kept a crystal pitcher of cold water and a candy dish of wrapped gourmet dark chocolates. I poured some water into a glass and brought it back over to her before sitting on the foot of my canopied bed. I placed my ankle on my thigh and watched her. Usually, I'm away on business, and only my son is here. I watched her take a small sip of water. Once she seemed to calm down a bit, I sighed and ran a hand through my hair. It was slightly gray, and I thought something about it made me more distinguished. Women seemed to love it anyway, especially when I was lavishing them between their thighs. "Why don't I take you to my son, HM?" I stood up with a groan and walked over, holding my hand out for her. Her hand slightly trembled as she reached up to place it in mine, allowing me to help her up from the chair. I gently took the empty glass from her and set it on top of one of my counters. She passed me my suit coat and I draped it over my spanking bench before grabbing a navy button-down shirt to wear. Her eyes wouldn't look at me as I buttoned my shirt. I couldn't help but chuckle. It wasn't often for me to run into shy girls nowadays, especially a shy, cute and innocent one like her. "What's your name?" I finished buttoning the third button from the top of my shirt. "Oh, Olivia." She cleared her throat and blushed. "And your last name?" I walked a few steps away to loosen my belt and pants to tuck my shirt in before clasping my belt again. Most women would have gazed at the bulge in my pants, but not her. Richardson." She let her last name spill from her lips. After checking I was properly dressed, I walked back to face her with a smile. "Nice to meet you, Miss Richardson." Chapter 3. She smelled heavenly. "Nice to meet you too, Mr. Peterson." She curtsied in the sweetest way despite our unusual encounter. Whoever raised her well. "Please, call me Ellis," I instructed. I suddenly realized where I had heard that name before. "You wouldn't happen to be Olivia Richardson, the daughter of the Richardson Empire, would you?" She shyly nodded. "Yes, sir, that's me." I arched my brow. How did my idiot son pull such an elegant young lady like her? A shot of adrenaline coursed through my veins at hearing her call me sir. Although I preferred to be called master, she didn't need to know that. I needed to take her to my damn ungrateful son. "How about we go find Carl?" I placed my other hand in my pocket and strode to the door. I opened it and held it for her. "Ladies first." "Thank you." She finally seemed to calm down enough to smile. Then she stepped past me with grace and poise that had obviously been drilled into her since birth. Her sweet and floral perfume swirled around me. This wasn't usually my preferred type of scent, but I had to admit, she smelled heavenly. Your family has been in the business for a long time. I walked beside her down the long corridors of my mansion. For a few generations, she kept her hands clasped in front of her with a nervous disposition. I had the pleasure of meeting your parents at various charity events. I tried to make small talk with her on the way to the West Wing where my son stayed. Ah, yes, they like to try and make a difference in the world. She gazed around, taking in my expansive home and all of the little details that I had carefully placed from traveling around the world on various business endeavors. It was quiet and only our footfalls echoed. To break the awkward silence, she glanced at the grand piano in the entrance, and complimented, "Beautiful piano." "Ah, I was the highest bidder at a charity auction," I recalled, telling her casually. "It's one of the most expensive grand pianos to ever exist," she commented. "The charity must be very thankful for your generous contribution." I let out a hearty laugh. I liked her already. "Do you play, Miss Richardson?" I straightened up and waited patiently for her to answer. "I do. I was taught from a very young age how to play," she answered gently. "I'm sure you play beautifully." A slight smile formed across my lips. We reached the West Wing, and I heard my son talking on his phone in a hushed tone that made me scowl. He was pacing and his body language was making me skeptical. If he wasn't flirting with my various maids that I employed to work at the mansion, he was speaking to any WH*3 he could pick up. Had I raised him from a babe, he would have at least been an honest man. However, here I was, with my slimy, scheming son, who had somehow nabbed this fine young woman. I glanced over to the girl next to me. She was the kind of girl you brought home to mom, not the type you *cat on the side. Too bad that she was too naive to see Carl's true nature. Anyway, my son's life was none of my business, and this girl wasn't my responsibility to look after. Oh, of course I want my shift stick lubed up. It should be nice and fluid. We wouldn't want any hiccups when shifting gears. That F**king kid, he was having phone sex. Immediately as Miss Richardson and I came into view, Carl's eyes widened and he hung up the phone with a fake smile. He strutted up to the young woman beside me. "Olivia. I didn't know you were coming." "Sorry, I was just discussing a vehicle's warranty." "How are you?" "Oldest lie in the book and a weak one at that." Carl wouldn't look at me as I entered. He understood that I knew exactly what he was doing, but it seemed Miss Richardson didn't. "Oh, busy at work again?" "It seems those cars are having more and more issues these days." She seemed like she fully trusted him. "You know how business goes." My lying son peered at me, seemingly pleading with me not to say anything to Miss Richardson. I crossed my arms over my chest in disgust. "Speaking of business, I have some exciting news for you." The young woman's expression quickly brightened as she pulled an envelope out of her purse. "Take a look." Carl took the envelope out of her hands and quickly ripped the seal. His pupils dilated at what he saw. "Oh my God, Olivia. Are you serious?" They finally agreed. "Interesting. What did my slimy son get this girl to do for him?" Carl ran up to the girl and gave her a big hug, his eyes focused on me when his head was resting on her shoulder. He had the "Please, Dad, don't ruin this" look on him. "You deserve it, Carl." Miss Richardson spoke gently and proudly. My son was a devil for this one. As he pulled away from her, he clearly wanted me to know just how important this moment was for him. I didn't care, but I wanted to know the extent to which he duped this trusting young lady. Carl relayed clearly so I could hear. "I can't believe you secured $2 million. Greenwald Insurance Group will never be the same," he added proudly. If it didn't make matters any worse, he was using his wretched mother's maiden name for the company. After they exchanged another hug, Carl looked like a greedy kid in a candy store, one made of gemstones instead of bonbons, and Miss Richardson seemed ready to leave. "Oh, Carl, one last thing." She paused as she was about to exit the room. "You weren't out this weekend at a fancy restaurant, were you?" Carl cleared his throat and loosened the tie around his collar. He was nervous, I could tell by his fidgeting. "Oh, I was, just business stuff. I was meeting a top client, that's all." She seemed to be relieved, then she nodded. "I hope it went over well. I know you're busy so no need to see me out. Try to finish work so that you can rest. Good night." I growled and turned my attention away from them, as my son grabbed her wrist to place an equally soulless kiss on her pouty lips. Her face flushed a little, seemingly a bit embarrassed by kissing Carl in front of me. Then she bid my son goodbye and left his room with me. I wanted to tell her that she deserved someone better than Carl, but I held back. I wasn't her parent after all. I had enough wealth and success to buy anything I wanted: jewels, booze, vacation homes, islands, jets, yachts, and most of all, women. Somehow, Carl believed that he was also entitled to all of them just because he called me dad. When he realized that he might not be able to get everything he wanted from me, based on what I'd seen, he tried to get it from someone else. I guessed you couldn't polish something as awful as that and make something good out of it. He was raised wrong, and that would be near impossible to erase. He was a lost cause, and I wished Miss Richardson was smart enough to figure that out before it was too late. "I'll walk you out." I took a hand from my pocket and waved it forward to gesture for her to walk first. "Thank you," she politely thanked me, not meeting my eyes. "Carl works really hard. I hope I didn't take up too much of his time." Well, I guess she still had no clue who she was dating. I walked with her to the front doors, pinching the bridge of my nose in thought. After getting to know her a little bit, I wondered whether I should warn her about my son. I licked my lips, readying to speak as I paused at the double doors. I held one of the handles in my hand, readying to open it for her. I need to give you some advice." I peered at her, watching her look up at me with a worried expression. "Watch out for Carl. He's a lying, philandering brat." She looked at me with her lips parted, seemingly shocked, like all of my words were a damn lie. I had no idea how she hadn't caught on already to Carl's behavior, but maybe she was just too innocent, too trusting of a girl. I opened the door for her. "Good night, Miss Richardson." She still had a shocked expression on her face as she turned to walk back to her car. It didn't do any use to explain things in detail to her. Women like her needed time to realize they were being played. I hoped she eventually came to her senses. By the time I walked back to have a word with my son, he was leaning against a wall and raising his hand to brush a strand of loose hair behind one of my maid's ears. He leaned in to whisper something to her and then pulled away. He chuckled briefly while caressing her hand. As they heard me approaching, they quickly jumped apart. I glared at them and spoke directly to my maid. "Camilla, you've done quite enough. I don't want to see you back here again." I growled and watched my maid nod with tears in her eyes, but she didn't dare to defy me, and she scurried off to grab her belongings. Carl scoffed. "Always here to ruin my fun. You tricked Olivia Richardson into investing in your business in exchange for fake love?" I spat at Carl in a low, gravelly tone. "You're one to talk." Carl sneered at me and clenched his hands into fists. "You left me no choice. You wouldn't help me, remember?" I smirked. "I only invest with those who actually care about handling their business professionally." I watched him scowl at me and cross his arms over his chest. He stepped forward to size me up in my own domain and raised his voice. "You have no right to tell me what to do. She's already given you the money. What's done is done," I said stoically. As I drew closer to him, he immediately took a step back. "I have no interest in your relationship." Carl smiled in relief, probably thinking that I'd leave him alone. However, Carl Peterson, I gave him a warning glare. He was taken aback as I narrowed my eyes. "There is a line that you don't cross." Now, did I make myself clear? He swallowed hard and huffed and pouted like a child. "Crystal clear, Dad." Chapter 4. Top wanted bachelor in the country, Olivia POV. When I arrived back at home and was safely in my bedroom, my phone began to ring in my purse. I shoved it onto my desk and reached inside to dig around for my phone. It took me a moment to find it, but eventually I had it pressed to my ear. "Hi, Carl." I was surprised that he had called me so soon after being there. "Hey. Sorry, I didn't speak with you much when you were over." He sounded apologetic, and I didn't understand why. "It's okay, you don't need to apologize to me. You've been really busy lately with work." I played with a perfume bottle on my vanity. While I talked to him, I wanted to tell you how grateful I am that your parents decided to invest in my company. Carl really was the sweetest man I had ever met. He continued. "I wanted to ask you if you would like to come to our vacation home in Long Island to spend the upcoming holiday together." My heart began to speed up as I worried about being alone in a massive house with my fiance. I had never been alone with him on a vacation of any kind. "If you'd like, you could ask your sister to accompany you. The more the merrier." Carl was always so thoughtful, and this only made him more so. "That's so sweet of you, Carl." I softly smiled and rested my chin on my fist, peering out my window at the topiaries and trees outside. "Well, I do what I can." Carl softly laughed. I loved his laugh. It was always genuine and kind. "Why don't you talk to Bethany about it and get back to me, HM?" "Okay." I was ecstatic. I couldn't wait to ask my sister if she would go with me. I wanted to go to his summer home, but I didn't want to go alone, and Bethany seemed like the best choice. Let me know what she says, Carl requested excitedly. He was far too kind to me. Sounds good, thank you, Carl. I hung up the phone and rushed to go find Bethany. She was probably in her bedroom reading a magazine of some sort. My sister was the gentlest and kindest woman. She was adopted by my parents, but you would never know it because they raised her as their own. Everyone liked my sister, and I mean everyone. There were a few guys who said they liked me, but after they got to know Bethany, they eventually all went to pursue her. I wasn't resentful. She was just beautiful and charming. Who wouldn't love her? Of course, Carl was that only exception. He'd told me many times that he only had eyes for me. I reached her bedroom door down a long hallway and knocked on it with our secret sequence of knocks that we had since we were kids. It took her a moment to yell for me to come in. I opened her door and stepped into her lavish black and gold bedroom. She was laying on her bed, kicking her feet with one ankle crossed over the other and a magazine in her hands. What did you need, Olivia? I bit my bottom lip and clasped my hands behind my back, swaying back and forth. I was nervous to ask her, what if she already had plans and couldn't accompany me? Hey, Beth, do you have any plans for spring break? I do. She peered up at me from the article she was reading and gave me a smile. Even though she was my sister and I'd seen her smile so many times, it never failed to remind me how charming it was. No wonder all the guys fell for her. Oh, I said disappointedly, why did you ask? She seemed to have noticed my unsettled tone. I looked at the floor and told her the truth. Carl invited me to his vacation home in Long Island, and he said the more the merrier. I was wondering whether you could accompany me? You know, I'm just nervous to go alone with him. I was shy and slightly embarrassed to admit that I was scared to be alone with my fiance, but I was. Peterson's vacation home? She repeated. I nodded at her to confirm. Bethany peered up at me, closing her magazine and sitting up on her bed. She thought for a moment and then replied, all right, I'll go with you. What? I hadn't expected that she would change her plans so easily for me. You sure? I didn't want to ruin your vacation. She looked at me and smiled. Because I worry about your safety, and I want you to have fun. I'll go. I don't want my little sister to worry when she's supposed to be enjoying a vacation. I ran over to jump onto her bed and gave her a huge hug. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Her body seemed to freeze for a second at my embrace, but then she patted my back and exclaimed happily, let's get packing. We arrived at the Petersons' vacation home. It was a beautiful white mansion on the edge of the ocean. The cool breeze swirled around us, and the scent of the water filled my senses. It was gorgeous outside. The mansion towered over us, but it felt less intimidating than their main estate. Something about it was airy and relaxing, despite the fact that it dominated the coastline. When we walked up to the wooden steps to the front door, a maid welcomed us. Her uniform was similar to the one that I had met at the Peterson mansion back home, short and teetering on inappropriate for a work setting, yet it reminded me of the old maid outfits from ages ago. Welcome to the Peterson vacation home, Miss Richardson, the maid greeted me before turning to my sister and welcoming her as well. And you too, Miss Bethany. I saw Bethany frown slightly as if she was offended. I was about to check whether she was all right when her smile returned. Did I see it wrong, mister? Carl isn't home yet, the maid continued. I nodded. Carl had been busy lately. He was probably still working. The maid then urged, Miss Richardson, if you'll follow me, Miss Bethany, our butler will take your suitcases and show you where you'll be staying. I peered over my shoulder to see that my sister was being taken to another side of the house. I wondered if I was being led to my fiance and was curious as to why I had been separated from Bethany. Carl must have wanted to speak with me privately. The maid silently walked in front of me, causing the hem of her uniform to swish back and forth. I stared at the wood flooring, freezing when I saw the same Triscale emblem on the floor in a lighter wood stain than the rest of the flooring. I wondered if it was a family symbol or something else entirely since it was not at one house but two. She continued to lead me down a long hallway. I got lost in the memory of the obsidian and silver emblem back at the other Peterson house, not watching where I was going, and I suddenly ran into something solid and unmoving. I gasped and looked up, locking my gaze with a familiar tall man with a trimmed beard and dark eyes that bored into mine. Oh, Mr. Peterson, the maid greeted him. This is Miss Richardson, Mr. Carl's guest, sorry. I apologized as I took a few steps back. My lips parted as I took in his perfectly tailored charcoal-colored designer suit with a plum and gold-accented pocket square that was neatly folded into his breast pocket. His button-down shirt was a dark plum and was accented by a black silk tie. I dropped my eyes. My gaze was caught by his steel belt buckle and matching onyx slacks. His shoes were Italian leather and black as oil, drawing my attention because of how clean and polished they were. But then, I suddenly tripped over the doorway of his office like a complete klutz. I prepared myself to meet the floor, screaming, when strong hands wrapped around my body and my hands landed on hard muscular pecs beneath expensive fabric. "Be careful," his deep and soothing voice rang in my ear. My face pressed against his silk shirt and tie, and I was surrounded by his spiced citrus cologne. Then, uncontrollably, I felt heat climbing up my face and heard my heart thumping loudly. When I came to my senses, I shoved him away by his chest and cleared my throat. I'm sorry. And thank you." I lowered my head, brushing my hands down the front of my summer dress before fixing my hair. A warmth spread across my cheeks and down my neck, the sensation dancing along my shoulders. I glanced around to see if anyone had seen it and was relieved that no one else was there to see me trip into him. A wall of silence passed between us, and I couldn't help but look up again, our eyes locked to one another. His soul resided in his eyes, making me transfixed by them. The light filtering in from the nearby window made sparks of honey shine in his warm brown eyes. He stared at me, and a corner of his lips curled up into a dangerous smirk. He was dark, dangerous, and attractive. I was shocked by how I described him in my mind, and I pushed my thoughts aside as soon as possible. He was the type of man that I had been raised to stay far away from. "You're welcome," he smirked. I quickly scrambled towards the doorway without more words, feeling his gaze on my back as I hurried out of the office. I didn't know what he was thinking, but my instinct told me it was dangerous, virulent, and I should get away. The walls of the room had suddenly felt like they were caving in and crushing me, caressing me, and teasing me. The atmosphere grew thick to where I could barely breathe. The maid followed me and she explained, "Miss Richardson, this must be the first time you met Mr. Peterson? It's okay, you don't have to run away. It was just an accident that you ran into him and he wouldn't get upset by that. You aren't one of those ladies." I didn't need to tell her that this wasn't my first encounter with him. I wanted to forget everything about this man, the day I had first run into him on top of tripping on him. I was curious by her statement, "One of those ladies." She smiled and explained, "Mr. Ellis Peterson is the head of the Peterson Empire. As a wealthy, influential, and extraordinarily charming 35-year-old, he is the top wanted bachelor in the country. Ladies are after him, but most of them are not welcome here." I raked my teeth along my bottom lip and discreetly peered over my shoulder. I caught a glance of him bending over with a hand in his pocket, as if he was picking something up, and I ignored it, thinking he must have dropped something when I had run into him. Chapter 5. Are you coming back for more? Since Carl wasn't around, I got myself settled down in the room and checked my school emails to catch up. It took a bit longer than I anticipated, and I didn't realize it was getting dark. I was trying to fill out some paperwork when I noticed my driver's license was missing. Where had I left it? Did I lose it on the way here? Had I left it at home? No, because I had it at one point after we had taken off to come here. I went on a wild search for it through my bags, hoping that I had just placed it in a weird pocket or something, but to no avail. I took a moment to sit and think about where I could have misplaced it. Maybe it had fallen out when my bags were taken from me? Maybe Bethany had seen it? I decided to check with my sister, but the house was too big and I certainly didn't want to walk into a wrong room again. "Excuse me." I grabbed one of the house staff's attention with a smile. He smiled politely at me in return with a cream towel draped over his forearm. "Yes, Miss Richardson? How may I be of service to you?" "I was wondering if you could take me to my sister's room." Surely. However, as far as I know, she wasn't there the last time I went to check, the gentleman noted. He saw my confusion and explained, "Mr. Carl came back earlier, but left again to handle a business agreement. Miss Bethany volunteered to accompany him, saying she knew about the company he was meeting with. She said you were probably catching up with your schoolwork, and it was better not interrupt you. Miss Bethany's room is this way." He gestured for me to follow. I shook my head. "If that's the case, I'll just wait for them to come back." "Of course." He straightened his posture with one arm bent in front of him and the other behind his back, like he was trained to pose a specific way. Anything else that I can do for you, Miss Richardson? No, I'm alright, thank you though. I gave him the best smile I could while being a little disappointed. Carl and I both tried to give each other space when it came to our own responsibilities. I did appreciate Bethany stepping in to help, however, today I wished Carl would have checked with me first. After all, I was his fiance, and it would be my role to stand by his side if he felt that the Richardson network might help him in this business meeting. The attendant courteously suggested, "Please make yourself at home and let us know if you need anything." Then he bowed one more time and left me on my own. I sighed and decided to try my luck to find my driver's license on my own. The hallway was empty with evenly spaced white sconce lights running down the dark gray walls, causing it to be dimly lit. The flooring was a gorgeous ebony wood and I followed it. The corridors and hallways were endless. I didn't know where I had dropped my driver's license, but it had to be somewhere here. I continued to search through the mansion like a mouse in a maze when I was suddenly met with a set of double doors. I was intrigued. It seemed to be a relatively public place, and I figured it should be safe to walk in. I grabbed the double handles, shoving the doors open to reveal a massive indoor pool with a waterfall feature in one corner and that same distracting tri-scale emblem on the bottom of the pool. Lounge chairs lined the sides, but that wasn't what grabbed my attention. There was a man swimming in the pool. My gaze locked on the way his back muscles moved with each stroke of his powerful arms. His skin was sun-kissed and gorgeous, and his black swim shorts were soaking wet and riding low on his hips. His feet kicked through the water as he propelled himself forward, turning his head every so often to catch his breath. My lips parted as I watched him do a front flip and kick off the back wall to glide beneath the water towards me in a majestic movement. He rose from the water, flipping his soaking wet dark hair back and causing water droplets to cascade down from the air around him. Reaching up, he ran a hand through his hair to brush it back, causing his tricep to flex. A blush danced across my cheeks as I realized it was Carl's father again, Mr. Ellis Peterson. I tried to back out of the door unnoticed, but it was too late. He saw me. He smirked and gazed at me in a way that spoke of secrets. Hi, Mr. Peterson, I muttered. Hello again. He peered at me with a smirk. I licked my lips as he swam forward, grabbed the edge of the pool, and slowly lifted himself up and out of the pool. All of his muscles flexed, causing my mouth to run dry and my lips to part. He stepped closer, and I could feel my blush spreading across my face and deepening in hue. My chest began to warm up considerably. I'm so sorry to bother you, I explained. The words fell from my lips in a rapid slur. I was just looking for my ID. Really? He smirked. I paused and confused. Why would I lie? He stepped closer, leaned forward and lowered his voice. Maybe you couldn't stop thinking about the other night. I froze, and immediately felt ashamed, angry, and nervous, as I crossed my arms and snapped, of course, not. Why would you even think that? He stepped forward as I inched back. Are you sure? He leaned down before whispering against my ear. His deep voice rang, and I felt goosebumps all over my body. I quivered and gripped my upper arms in defense. Of course, I am. I huffed and pouted at him, causing him to laugh again. I was just teasing you. He seemed to be greatly entertained. I glared at him as I pulled away to give myself safe distance from him. He grabbed a towel. Seeing my furrowed brow, he smirked. Relax, I found your ID. You dropped it when you ran from my office. I'll have my maid fetch it for you. If he had it, why couldn't he just tell me? Did he have to make those bad jokes? Before he wrapped the towel around his waist, I caught a glimpse of his tight, dripping swim shorts, and I couldn't stop my face from heating up a bit. He stepped closer towards me again and lifted my chin with his index finger, so that my gaze was on him. This time, although we were close, my instinct told me he wouldn't do anything bad to me. He simply found me entertaining. He couldn't press down the curled-up corners of his lips, and he let out another hearty laugh. I just think that sometimes you act silly. Like an innocent silly bunny. I stepped away from him and retorted, I'm not silly, nor am I a bunny. Well, you're still with Carl, it's none of your business. I huffed and pouted at him. He watched me and let out a laugh again. He agreed, you're right. I didn't expect him to agree with me so fast. It made me curious. Why do you care anyway? I wondered, because I'm a good dad? He replied mischievously, excuse me, a good dad would give us his blessing instead. I reminded him, you're right, Ellis affirmed. Good luck, little bunny. Stop calling me bunny. Ellis's laugh picked up again like he was enjoying every minute of it. Finally, he stopped laughing and apologized with a smile on his face. All right, sorry, you're just so funny and cute when you're angry, he confessed with a shrug, although I really didn't sense that he felt sorry at all. I did not feel like entertaining my fiance's wicked father anymore, so I broke away from him by backing up a few more steps. Wait, don't step back. He tried to stop me when suddenly I slipped on the wet pool deck and fell backwards. I let out a scream before falling into the heated pool. *T was the last thing I heard before I hit the water with a loud splash. Chapter 6, Crashing into You. The warm water rushed up around me, causing the sounds outside of the water to blur and become a mumble. Ringing echoed in my ears, making me cringe from the sharp sound. Time felt like it had slowed down before I suddenly realized I was sinking. I began to panic, flailing my arms around beneath the water and hoping to rise up. I foolishly gasped for air beneath the waves, thinking that would save me. Water filled my nose and lungs, causing my heart to race harder and me to panic more. I kicked and choked on the intrusive chlorinated water when I heard a loud splash beside me. I tried to swim to the surface, but I was disoriented and scared. It wasn't long before a pair of strong arms wrapped around me and pulled me up to the surface while I was kicking and gasping for air, unable to make a sound. I clawed at muscular pecs, panicking, coughing up water, and gasping for air. "You're all right," a low voice spoke as if to console me. It was then I realized who had jumped in to save me. "I have you." He patted my back hard with his palm, trying to get me to cough out more water from my burning lungs. A large hand ran over my eyes to wipe away the water that burned my eyes, nose, and throat. I panted and peered at him. He was blurry at first, and it soon gave way to clarity. He looked concerned and was busily gripping my chin and turning my head from side to side. "Did you hit your head? Are you all right?" Ellis brushed my soaking wet hair away from my temples, looking for head injuries. "I should call for a flashlight to check if you have a concussion." "God, you scared the F***ck out of me. You don't know how to swim?" I wanted to say, "I do," but I panicked just now. My lips parted as my hands clung to his pecs without thinking, leaving welts in their wake. Why was he doting on me like he cared what happened to me? I scoffed and shoved him away, treading through the water. I grabbed the edge of the pool to get out, but I failed to push myself up. "Here, let me help you." He grabbed my hips and lifted me up so I could climb out. I clutched my arms around myself and shivered. It was warmer in the pool compared to outside it. I heard the sound of water rushing and dripping onto the pool deck as I peered over my shoulder. There he was again, rising from the water like some god, looking all intimidating and attractive. I shook my head. It wasn't right for me to use that description on my fiance's father. "Here, let me dry your hair for you." Ellis grabbed the plush white towel from a towel warmer off to the side. He brought it over, unrolling it and holding it out towards me. Then he stopped in his tracks a couple steps away from me. I noticed that he had a smirk on his face. I peered down to realize I was wearing a white summer dress of all things, and it had gone completely see-through and had clung to my curves. My nipples hardened from the cold and brushed against the soaking wet fabric, which made my body more visible. I squeaked and covered my breasts with my left arm and grabbed the towel from him with my other hand, watching a smirk slowly appear on his lips. "Thank you, but no, I don't need your help." I wrapped myself with the towel, and my face heated up. I was so embarrassed. Ugh, I wanted the earth to swallow me whole. At that moment, the noise of the door opened behind me, drawing both of our attention. "Mr. Peterson, your guest has arrived." A maid appeared. She was surprised to see me. "I'll be right there," Ellis replied, and then he added, "Miss Richardson had just fallen in the pool by accident. Help her if she needs it. Also, she dropped her ID in my office. Please go fetch it for her." The maid bowed to him, and then smiled at me. "Miss Richardson, please allow me to show you the way to your room." I turned on my heels, shivering, and followed her out of the indoor pool area with a blush on my face. Had that really just happened? Of all things I could have fallen into a pool wearing, and what was with that look on his face? I was beyond mortified. After returning to my room, I took a much-needed shower. The hot water washed the smell of chlorine off of me, but not the memory of his warm body pressed against mine. I sighed and decided to call it a night. I hoped a solid rest would help take my mind off of Ellis and his skin-tight bathing suit. Ellis POV. I headed towards my home dungeon to meet the submissive I hired from the luxury club I had frequented often. I had almost forgotten I hired one for tonight after the whole incident at the pool with Miss Richardson. When I arrived at the door to my playroom, I undid my tie and let it hang around my collar with the top buttons of my shirt opened. I passed my suit coat to a maid nearby and slipped into my dungeon. There she was with her back to me. Her lingerie was a dark cherry wine and made from a PVC material. Her hair was long, dark, and up in a high ponytail wrapped with a hair tie made from latex tape. She was spot on with her attire, all my usual favorites. I could tell that she had done her best to please me, just like all other girls that ever came into my dungeon, because they knew I'd make them feel appreciated in return. To negotiate and communicate, to make an art piece together by melding our passions and fantasies together. I loved to let go and take charge in the bedroom, taking their deepest and darkest desires and bringing them to life before their eyes. That was my favorite pastime. My gaze landed on the submissive in my playroom. She was obedient, bending to my every whim just like we had discussed. In fact, she seemed to be a dream to play with, but for some reason, tonight, I wasn't feeling anything. I slowly stepped towards the woman kneeling on the crushed velvet pillow on my floor. My pristine dress shoes echoed along the hard tile flooring as I stepped in front of her. She slowly slid her hands down her thighs to press her lips to the tip of my shoe before placing her head upon it. I slightly lifted my toe and spoke in a low tone. "Red." She sat back on her heels and peered up at me with a curious expression. "Red?" I held my hand out from her. "Stand for me." The woman took my hand and stood up. I walked over to grab her a bottle of water from a mini fridge and her coat. I draped the coat over her shoulders and handed her the cold water. "I don't understand. Why did you call your safe word?" She searched my gaze in confusion. "I'm not in the mood to play tonight, master. Did I do anything wrong?" Her eyes were widened, and tears glimmered in her doe eye. She was indeed a babe. However, tonight, something was off. I shook my head. "No, you didn't. Just that I had a long day." "Keep the money. Thank you for coming anyway." The submissive had an even more surprised expression on her face, but soon, she lowered her head. "Thank you, master," she said before she grabbed her aftercare bag. I walked her to one of my maids. "Miss Vale will be leaving for the evening. See to it that she makes it back to her car safely." The submissive lowered her head again appreciatively and took her leave, while I crossed my arms over my chest and nodded with a wide stance, watching her departure. FCK. This was annoying. I sighed and walked back to my dungeon, running my fingers along the red and black floggers hanging on the wall. My mind wandered. I usually loved running these along submissives' back and down their *ses. I loved how they would beg me for more. I relished when a submissive's back would arch blissfully as she pulled up my wrist restraints while she bent over my spanking bench. I wanted nothing more than to separate a submissive's legs and worship her like she deserved, but why not tonight? I let the soft leather flails of the floggers run along my hand and slowly fall before I walked over to pick up the pillow from the floor. I was annoyed with myself. What had gotten into me? #hashtag chapter 7. Is she your new toy? *** Olivia POV. Carl finally came back with my sister the next day, making me super excited to see him. I ran towards him with a giggle, jumping into his arms. He wrapped his arms around me and pressed a kiss to my lips. However, the spark still didn't quite fly, despite the fact that I was so thrilled to see him. "Hey, honey. You look beautiful today." He pushed me away and took my hand to spin me around, causing my pink dress to flare out around my thighs. He pulled me in and touched my cheek with his hand. "I missed you. I missed you too. How was your business meeting?" I was excited to hear how it had gone. "It was great. We talked over a few drinks at a local bar. Bethany really knows how to capture a room and reel them in. She has great assets to bring to the table." Carl went on about how amazing my sister was. "I'm glad she helped you," I commented, even though I was still a bit upset that he didn't come check with me before he took my sister on the trip. But I decided to focus on what I could control, not something that had already happened. "So, what do you want to do first?" I was looking forward to spending time with him. After all, that was why we came here. "I'd love to show you around, but I'm tired from my long trip. I'm going to go lay down for a bit." He leaned down to kiss my cheek. "I can go with you." I grabbed his wrist and walked with him. "No, actually, I'm a bit tired. Do you mind me catching up with you later?" "Oh, of course," I said. What else could I say? "Thanks, Olivia. I really appreciate it." He took my hands from his wrist and smiled before leaving me alone. I nodded reassuringly with a smile, but as he turned away to leave, my smile faded. Why wouldn't he want to spend time with me? I thought he would have wanted to see me. Yes, I got it, he had just gotten home and may be tired, but it wasn't like I was asking him to be super active. We could have watched a movie or lounged beside the indoor pool to relax. He could have laid on a couch while I played him piano. There were so many options, yet he chose to be alone. Did I do anything that upset him? Maybe I should talk to my sister. She probably would have some recommendations. However, when I reached her door, it was shut as if she was asleep. I sighed and touched the door. She was probably tired like Carl as well from the meeting. I stood in the hallway for a moment, noticing golden sunshine peering onto the floor through the window. It was a beautiful day today. Since there wasn't much I could do, I figured getting some fresh air in the garden would be a good idea. I was happy with my choice the moment I was greeted with a fresh breeze and delicious floral scents. I smiled. It was a gorgeous day, and my mood was immediately brightened. Wait. A young woman's voice caught my attention. There were a few tall bushes surrounding me, and I paused in my tracks, trying to figure out which direction the sound came from. Ellis, please listen to me. I've never met someone like you before, and him again, I needed to get out of here. But it was too late. Ellis had turned the corner from behind a bush and he saw me. I watched a smile spread across his face as soon as he realized that I was there. I put my index finger against my lips and tried to tell him silently with my gestures, "Sorry, I'll leave now." However, before I could sneak away, I saw a 20-some-year-old girl caught up behind him. "Ellis, I can't stop thinking about you. Why don't you give me a chance? Give us a chance." Ellis stopped to look at her, his voice low and cold. "I've already told you, I have no interest. Why do you treat me like this?" The girl sobbed. He didn't say anything more, but turned around and walked towards me. I could see the annoyance on his face. Did he have to be so harsh on the poor young lady? But it was none of my business. I had no interest in my fiance's father's relationships. All I wanted to do was leave the scene before she noticed me. She continued begging, "I can do anything for you. I love you." However, her words caught at her throat the moment she saw me. For a moment, I didn't know whether I should pretend I didn't see anything and walk away, or I should give her a smile and greet her. She didn't give me any choices though. "Who is she? Is she your new toy?" She pointed at me angrily, demanding an answer from Ellis. Ellis frowned and narrowed his eyes. He immediately warned her, "Watch what you're saying. She is." She ran closer to me and looked at me up and down. She shouted, "Is that why? Ellis? Because you have a new toy now? You don't want to be with me because of her?" My eyes widened. What was she talking about? Me? Ellis? No, of course not. She seduced you, didn't she? She continued. I was dumbfounded and couldn't believe I was stuck in such a drama. I seduced Ellis? I looked towards Ellis, who seemed to be as surprised as me, but very quickly, he gave me an innocent look with a slight shrug. "Ellis, how could you? How could you?" The girl started sobbing, pounding her fists against his chest. I gestured to Ellis with my hands and moved my lips to silently say to him, "Tell her that she misunderstood." However, after the initial shock, for some reason, he stood there quietly and stared at me for a couple seconds. Then, as if he was amused, I saw the corner of his lips curling up. What was so funny? Did he not understand the situation? Knowing I couldn't count on Ellis to clear the misunderstanding, I cleared my throat and explained to the young woman, "Excuse me, but I think you might have. Yes, I'm dating her, now you know why." Ellis walked up next to me and looped his arm around my waist. I froze. What was he talking about? The woman shifted her jaw and glared at me. "You choose her over me. Why wouldn't I? As you can see, she's just gorgeous," he said as he warmly smiled down at me and brushed a strand of my hair behind my ear, ignoring the way I was staring at him with an irritated expression. "She's the most attractive, cute, and smart woman I've ever seen," I gasped, and couldn't believe what I heard. What was going on? How dare he? The young woman looked at him, and looked at me, and finally burst into tears. She covered her face with her hands, and as if she couldn't stand one more second here, she cried as she ran away. "Ellis, I hate you." After she was out of sight, Ellis pulled out his cell phone and ordered, "Security, make sure she's out of the property. Also, tell Davis Wilson that if his sister ever sets foot in my property again, his contract that is due to renew in a month will be terminated." I couldn't wrap my head around what happened. Realizing that Ellis's hand was still on my waist, I jerkily pulled myself away from him and glared at him. What were you talking about? I'm not. You're not what? My toy? He pulled up a crooked smile as if he was greatly amused. How could he say it like that? My face was burning again, and I protested. How could you tell her that? I'm not dating you. You're such a liar. His smile faded from his face, and his eyes narrowed a bit. I paused for a moment. Was he angry? But how could he be angry with me? I didn't do anything wrong. I shook my head. Why should I even be concerned about whether he was upset or not? I was just taking a walk in the garden and then pulled into this drama. Miss Richardson, he put a hand into his pocket and kept his distance. First, thanks for helping me get rid of that girl. Second, I'm sorry if what I did just now bothered you, but it was just much easier that way, I sneered. He always made it sound like he had a good reason for everything he did. Third, he looked me in the eyes. Without his usual smile, he felt a bit cold and distant, you can rest assured. I have no interest in foolish girls, excuse me? I was taken aback. That's right, he said as he started walking back to the house. I don't like foolish women. Remember what I told the girl about you? I paused. I remembered he said I was the most beautiful, attractive, cute, smart woman. I wasn't sure why he brought it up, and my face was heating up a little. I muttered, I knew you just made it up. It's not like you really meant it. I meant it. He shrugged. I froze. But then he said, everything besides being smart. Did he just say that I wasn't intelligent? I was at the top of my class. I crossed my arms and raised an eyebrow at him, speechless. He smirked, leaning back against a topiary with his hands in his pockets. His crooked smile made me feel that he was amused by me again. Then he delivered, well, someone who was smart wouldn't believe everything my son does or still be dating him. I scoffed. How can you be Carl's father but be so negative about him? He had a short laugh before walking away without another word.